Welcome back, you guys. Today I'm going to show you how to make this Snickers drip cake. As you can see, this cake is a bit of a different shape than my normal circle cakes. I am using 3 8-inch square cake layers to make this. So this is just my go-to chocolate layer cake recipe, and I'm frosting it with my classic American buttercream, which I added a bit of peanut butter to. If you want the full recipe for my peanut butter buttercream, you can visit Chelsweets.com. Once I had added a very generous layer of buttercream to my cake layer, I smoothed it using my large offset spatula, and I then drizzled some caramel and some chocolate ganache over my frosting. So both of these are made from scratch. The recipes are up on Chelsweets.com, and I'm using squirt bottles to add them to my cake just because it makes the process a bit easier and less messy. But if you don't have any on hand, you could definitely use a spoon to drizzle these over your cake. To add a little bit of texture to this cake, I added some chopped up honey roasted peanuts between my cake layers. I really love the way they taste, and I so encourage you to use the honey roasted kind. I repeated this process with my next cake layer, and as you guys can see, because we're adding so much buttercream between our cake layers, this cake is going to have a lot of height. Because of that, I decided to only use 3 cake layers to make this cake. Once I had topped off my cake with that final layer, I added a bit more buttercream around the cake and between the cake layers to begin my crumb coat. Frosting a square cake is a bit harder than frosting a circular cake, but the process is still the same. You're going to start by adding a thin crumb coat around the entire cake by smoothing first with your offset spatula and then trying to get your lines as sharp as you can using a bench scraper and removing any excess buttercream. So once my crumb coat was complete and smooth, I chilled my cake in the freezer for about 5 minutes until it was firm to the touch, and then I began adding a second thicker layer of buttercream. So for this, I added a really thick layer because in order to truly cover all of those dark chocolate cake layers, you need a lot of buttercream. You also need a lot of buttercream to enable you to get those nice sharp corners. And on this cake, my corners ended up being a little bit more rounded than sharp, but I was kind of okay with the way it ended up looking. And since we're going to be adding drips onto this cake, your sides are going to be a bit more forgiving. So I popped the cake in the freezer for another 5 minutes just to make sure that second layer was nice and chilled, and I then began adding on my drips. So I started with my caramel sauce, which I had warmed up in the microwave for about 15 seconds just to get it to a really nice fluid consistency. And I'm adding these at different intervals throughout the sides of my cake to create a really fun alternating pattern with the chocolate ganache. If you wanted to be really precise, you could use a ruler and mark intervals around your cake to get your spacing just right. I didn't do anything quite that particular with this just because I was having fun, so my spacing does vary a tiny bit, but I think that this is a really fun and playful cake, and I don't think that it really has to be so precise. Once I had added on all of my caramel drips, I started to work on my chocolate ganache. So as you can see, the caramel runs pretty far down the cake, and it's a little bit more fluid than my chocolate ganache. So this can be driven by, number one, just the different consistencies of caramel versus ganache, but it also can be driven by the warmth of the ganache and the caramel. So as you're doing this, it's always great to do a test drip just to make sure that your temperatures are right and that you're going to get pretty consistent drips. Another factor simply is time. So if you added your caramel drips first, they've had more time to run down the side of the cake, whereas your chocolate ganache drips might take a little bit more time to get down to the same length. If you guys want to see an in-depth tutorial about how to make drip cakes and how to learn all of my tips and tricks, you can click the link in the upper right corner. So just like that, we added on all of our drips. I am obsessed with that alternating pattern. I just love the way it looks, especially on the square cake. So next we just need to decorate the top of the cake, and in order to do this, I first added a fun little square with some ganache and a bit of caramel. The reason I'm adding this is because I want to add some chopped peanuts to the top of this cake, but they won't really stick very well to the frosting without a little bit of help. So once I had added a very generous layer of peanuts, I added on a bunch of different kinds of Snickers. I then did a little caramel swirl over my pieces of candy just to really finish this cake off. And that's it. Our square Snickers cake is complete. So to cut into this, I wasn't quite sure what kind of slice I should do, but I figured a square out of the corner was the most appropriate. So as you can see, we have that super thick layer of peanut butter buttercream, all of our caramel and chocolate, and this cake actually does taste just as good as it looks. So thanks for watching. If you guys enjoyed this tutorial, be sure to click the like and subscribe buttons below, and also let me know what cakes you'd like to see me make next.